Hello, everybody. Welcome to our lab session on advancing supply chains. I'm really excited to have with me today three incredible women that have been leading the charge on advancing sustainable supply chains with new materials. So I'm going to ask Ellen and Courtney and Jane to join me on screen and on mic.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi. Hello. Hi, Courtney. How are you?
Hi. I'm good.
Good. Ellen, nice to see you again. Jane as well. So everyone, this is designed to be a very interactive conversation and one that is, allows the conversation to go where it needs to go over the course of the next hour. So for those who are listening in, please put questions into the Q&A, and then we'll be bringing these questions into the session and addressing them as best as we can as we go through. So what I would love to do is to start out, I'll introduce who I am and why we thought this session was great for Sea Change. And then I would love to have Ellen and Courtney and Jane just tell us who you are, where you are joining us from, and the work that you do at your company. And then we'll dive into the discussion. So I'm June Ives. I am the CEO of Lonely Whale, and really excited to be here with all of you. My organization, Lonely Whale, is also the convener for an initiative that all three of the companies who are joining me here today are part of, called Next Wave Plastics Initiative, which has a goal by the end of the year 2025 to permanently remove 25,000 tons of ocean-bound plastic and integrate it permanently into their products. Alongside of that is to make sure that we are really caring for the communities where the plastic crisis is the worst and who really is on the front lines of this situation, which we're going to talk a little bit about today as well. So with that, I would love, Ellen, could you please introduce yourself, your company, and your role at the company?
Sure. So hi, everyone. I'm Ellen Jackowski. I'm HP's Chief Sustainability and Social Impact Officer. HP, formerly part of the Hewlett-Packard Company, is a company that makes PCs and printers and 3D printing, among other equipment. So I'm joining you from the San Francisco Bay Area.
Welcome. Thank you. And Courtney?
I am Courtney Munch. I'm the sustainability specialist for Trek Bikes. So I am essentially making the sustainability department at Trek since we didn't have one before I started. And I am working primarily in product development and engineering at the moment, trying to get that integrated into our design process. And I am tuning in from Kansas City, Missouri.
Welcome, Courtney. And Jane, our neighbor to the north.
Hi. First, I just want to mention that I know that there's a lot of buzzing when I'm speaking. The fan from my computer happens to be right next to the mic, so there's not really much I can do about it. So I'll mute myself when I'm not speaking. But I'm Jane Abernethy. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer from Humanscale. We are a manufacturer of leading ergonomic equipment, keeping people in a healthy body posture in the workplace and adjusting people's sort of work conditions and their situations to their body as opposed to the other way around. So in my role, I lead sustainability. So that means developing the vision for sustainability with our executive team and then working with the folks who implement it and making sure that it's actually communicated authentically and well afterwards as well. So I'm joining from Toronto.
Wonderful. Thank you for joining, Jane. And no worries about the sound. It actually wasn't that loud from where I'm sitting, so it was really good. So this session for us, I really felt like was a great session to bring to Sea Change because, we talk a lot about plastic waste. I think folks are, if you don't know that there's waste in the ocean, plastic waste in the ocean, I think you probably have been not watching the news or reading any reports, and I want to be in your shoes because for those of us who have been watching it, we know that we have a really pretty devastating situation on our hands. By the end of the year 2040, it's anticipated from the Pew Systemic Report that the best case scenario that we can achieve, which I choose not to accept, just to put this out here to begin with, and I would love to hear the panelists talk about this, is that we'll have a minimum of 5 million metric tons of new plastic entering the ocean every single year. I just think that is unacceptable, and I think the ladies here with me also agree that that's unacceptable, and I think we can solve for it today. But sitting really at the heart of the plastic waste situation are people. So we know today the connection between plastic generation, petrochemical industries, oil and gas, the production of virgin plastic resins from petroleum, the impact that has on local communities. But we don't talk as much, I believe, that we could around what are the communities like where this material comes from. So what all three of you have been doing is building and supporting the development of supply chains that allow for material to get collected before it enters the ocean. I think that's a key differentiator is, while it would be amazing to collect it from the ocean, we also know we can stop it from getting in. And at the heart of that collection are people. I want to start, Ellen, with you. This week and the last 2 weeks have really been a tough news coming out of Haiti, which is where a lot of your supply has been coming from. You've been working with Haiti for several years to develop the supply chain. Talk with us a little bit about what the situation has been and how HP and your partners are responding to this.
Sure. So in 2016, HP started working with a team of collectors in Haiti to gather ocean-bound plastic, so plastic before it reaches the ocean. We were sourcing that plastic, then shredding it and mixing it into our new plastics to go into our HP ink cartridges. And HP, of course, makes a lot of ink cartridges. And we were using over 1 million plastic bottles a day in that process, which is significant. So we thought, instead of sourcing all of that plastic out of the North American recycled plastics market, what if we went to a location like Haiti where we could create bigger impact, stop that plastic from flowing in the ocean? There's no municipal garbage collection there, unlike here where I live in San Francisco. Garbage trucks come around once a week to take my refuse and recycling. And there it doesn't happen. So by sourcing some of our recycled content out of Haiti, not only are we creating an environmental impact by preventing that plastic from flowing in the ocean, but also some significant social impact by creating jobs and livable wages. And Haiti being the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, it was a very good location for us to partner with and work with to set up our ocean-bound plastic supply chain. So if many of you saw on the news last weekend, Haiti sustained a 7.2 magnitude earthquake, which impact many of the communities and the collectors that we work with as part of our ocean-bound plastic supply chain. So we've spent the last several days working with our key partners on the ground, First Mile and Work, which is an NGO who's helped us with that plastic community since 2016, since we started working with them. So I guess the first thing I would say is, one, it's incredible to have such experienced and committed partners like Work and First Mile to help us navigate and respond to the disaster in Haiti, the earthquake this last weekend. Fortunately, no significant injuries were recorded by the personnel at our recycling facility, and our facility remains in operation. But the impact on the collector community hasn't been as good. We have a team sponsored by Work and First Mile that is doing an assessment right now with all of our plastic collectors. There's a certain area, the northern area of Haiti, that was affected most. So we're working with them on our response. We've been able to partner with UPS, our logistics provider, to send some medical supplies immediately down to Haiti to help our collector community. As well, the HP Foundation has made some significant donations to several NGOs, including Work, to support the recovery efforts.
Yeah, and I know all three of your companies have participated in development of a new framework that we're going to be releasing this fall called the Social Responsibility Framework for Ocean-Bound Plastic Supply Chains. It's been a long time in the making to make sure we get both the framing of social responsibility correct for this supply chain, which is a unique supply chain, and to make sure also that we can figure out the right approach to baseline performance, to take a look at what a maturity path looks like, and to start putting in practice some of the principles from the framework into the supply chain development that you all are doing. I mean, Jane, human is a part of the name of your company, Humanscale. And I know that it must be so important to you as you think about not only the supply chain, but others where as a company, you're really working very holistically around sustainability to really put the person kind of front and center. Can you talk a little bit about Humanscale's approach to really leaning into the people side of this and what some of the observations are that you've made as you've integrated more sustainable materials into your product line.
Yeah, that's been an interesting evolution. And my sustainability team works really closely with our supply chain team and our sourcing team, and we've been working more and more closely together. And I think one of the things that has shifted is, instead of looking at buying components or sourcing materials as its own thing, as in the material is the only part of the discussion, or the component is the only it's a part or a piece, does it meet the quality requirements, is it on time, and that's the end of the conversation. It's now expanded that conversation to include who's it coming from and how are they being affected by this, and what's happening in their region, and what's happening in those local communities where we're not operating directly, but we are influencing. So it's a lot more complicated of a conversation, and takes a lot more thought and a lot more effort to kind of dig a little deeper into the supply chain, and to think through really to think of things not just as a series of components, as a series of parts and pieces, but think of it as also all the people that are providing those.
Yeah, your supply chain is a little bit different, Jane. So historically, you've been working with fishing gear that has been sourced from South America. And can you talk a little bit about the impact that supply chain development has had on the communities on the ground where those fishing nets are now recovered? I mean, and I think, a lot of folks who are watching this have probably watched Seaspiracy, have really started to dive a little bit more deeply into the presence of ghost fishing nets in the ocean. They're so problematic. I mean, once they're in there, it's not like there's a beacon on them where we can go and find them and pull them out. And so these are for everyone who isn't familiar with it, they're typically called ghost fishing nets, ghost nets, and they are tremendously hazardous, except for the fish that broke free of the net in the HP video that you released right before the Olympics, which I thought was brilliant. Congrats on that. But these fishing nets then go out and they essentially drift around. And if a sea creature happens to encounter one, it's almost impossible for them to free themselves. So it has a direct impact on the marine life itself. But talk with us a little bit, Jane, about the impact on the people in the communities that are providing those nets instead of allowing them to just cast out.
Mm-hmm. So we had initially started our projects working in, as you mentioned, in South America. We had a really great partner, Borreo, who was very conscientious about interfacing with the communities and really making sure that the presence there was a really positive presence. So there was a lot of feedback from the communities. There was also a portion of the funds that went to purchase the nets were set aside for community projects like solar panels on a school, a number of different projects around ocean cleanups and plastic cleanups, and looking at removing additional ocean plastic that would have been, heading up initiatives where we're looking at alternate ways to deliver products and goods without the additional plastic. So that's been really exciting, and it was really great working with Borreo. They're a fantastic company. We've then also been expanding past that and working with additional suppliers. And that's been kind of interesting, other suppliers in other areas of the world. And we've had to bring that more to the table to say, let's look at what's actually happening in those communities. Now, working initially in Chile, the initial nets were actually being recovered back from the ocean, cleaned up, and then given back to us. And then, of course, very quickly, people realized there's no point in releasing the nets in the ocean and then going back and getting them. So then they started to bring them directly in. And that's more of a model that we're emulating with our other supply chains in the rest of the world, is to bring those nets in directly. So it's kind of working with those fishing communities to not have those nets in their ecosystems, which then actually makes it harder for them to fish and harder for them to be gathering the food that they then need to be gathering as well.
Yeah, there's also a people side of it, which is as a company, is your own companies and internal within the organizations that you work within. And Courtney, for those who haven't seen it, go check out Trek's first ever sustainability report. I mean, it's been amazing to watch Trek's sustainability focus grow leaps and bounds over the course of the last few years. I mean, the CEO of your company is really active on issues like climate change and passing the right policies at the federal level to ensure that we can really regulate our greenhouse gas emissions. But if I remember correctly, it seems to me that this work in ocean-bound plastic really almost got the conversation started internally at the company. Can you talk a little bit about how sustainability has grown at Trek and what some of the conversations are like today?
Definitely. So we have always had some enthusiasm at Trek for sustainability. Since we're an outdoor company, people are pretty invested in keeping the environment clean, making sure that it lasts as long as possible in the best state as possible. I think a lot of people just kind of stalled out with that enthusiasm just because they didn't know what direction to take that in. People get kind of stuck in the analysis paralysis phase and kind of just run away, find something they feel more in control of to go spend their time on. We were really lucky, though, that the president of our company made essentially a mandate at our supplier conference that we were going to become an environmentally friendly company fast, which still scared some people a little bit just because it doesn't really give a direction, but it essentially jump-started our sustainability program and initiatives and gave us the leverage that we needed to be able to prioritize that in the decisions we're making, and gave us, I guess, the leverage to start making that a priority instead of sliding it in if we could at the end of the design phase, being able to just figure out from the start of the project, like, what can we change about this to make it more sustainable, and making sure that it was actually competitive with the price.
Yeah, and what was so surprising to me, because I get this question all the time, and I would love for you all to kind of chime in here, because we have so much to add to this. But I think all of that, well, isn't it more expensive to work with ocean-bound plastic? And there's definitely an development cost when you're doing any new supply chain, right? I mean, Ellen and Jane and Courtney, you guys develop supply chains all the time. So there's always an upfront cost. But at what point do you start to look at price parity with this? And I know this wasn't a question that we talked about beforehand. So I'm throwing this out here because, Courtney, I think in your first product, the Trek Bond Tracker back cage, it actually was cheaper to use the ocean-bound plastic than it was to use the material that you were already sourcing. So it was a one-for-one change out, but the price was lower, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yep.
That's right. Yeah, but Ellen, you guys have put so much into developing the supply chain in Haiti and into the care of the people in the communities from where this material comes from. So talk with us about that supply chain development and why that upfront investment matters so much, and how you guys are thinking about this in terms of an investment in the community versus an investment in the material itself.
Sure. And I think, our approach was really to think holistically about how we built this part of our supply chain. We'd never done anything like this before, really working at that very first mile of, collecting that material to get it into our products and services. So, when we set out to do this, we sat down with our partners, from that very first mile all the way up to the final assembly manufacturer to figure out the cost model of that. So, one of the boundaries on this was the collectors needed to make a livable wage. How do we set up a financial model where that is one of the key components of how we build this process? Another boundary was HP didn't want to pay more for this type of plastic than the regular recycled plastic we were already buying to use in our products. So we kind of had to figure out, how do we set this up in a really efficient and effective way? And it required a couple points of investment along the way, one of which was building a washing line in Haiti. So instead of having to take the plastic that's collected off the ground and it's dirtier, right, than the other types of plastic we might buy because it has, dirt and sediment and other contaminants around it, we needed to do extra washing cycles on this plastic from Haiti than we did from other places. So that was adding cost, in fact. But what we figured out in the model was if we invested $2 million in that recycling infrastructure of a washing line, put it down in Haiti, one, that's more jobs in Haiti, and two, that takes costs out of the process. So we spent a lot of time really thinking through each step, the efficiency, and how to make a sustainable process for the long term. Because it wouldn't work for us if we decided, from a more philanthropic point of view, if we pay more for this, but then down the line something happens and cost pressures come and we have to pull out. We didn't want to create something with those circumstances. So thinking really clearly about that model and all the different points involved and how to be effective and efficient, I think is really important.
When I look at this plastic waste crisis, I think this is like an entrepreneur's, innovator's dream come true. You know, there's so many big problems, and I look at it and think, gosh, there's so many opportunities for this as well. And it's interesting being on the NGO side, because I think that there's so much focus on companies need to move faster than they are. Companies need to use less plastic. Yes, I think we all agree we could reduce the amount of plastic we're using, the non-durable plastics especially. But really a sense of we're not moving quickly enough. And I think, Jane, when we first started working with each other, you were really clear to point out to me, which I loved, and I've learned so much about supply chains since working with all of you. I'm sure I still don't know as much as I need to know about supply chains, but you were so clear to point out this is going to take a long time to get it right. How many groups at Humanscale does one have to work with in order to integrate ocean-bound plastic into one component of a chair? And why does it take so long, Jane? Like, why does it take so long to get this perfected?
Yeah, I know when we had launched our first product with ocean plastic back in 2018, we thought we would be able to just scale up and then launch another one the next month, and maybe 6 months later, or a number of months later, launch another. We launched our second one last month, so it's a number of years later, and it really was finding another supplier wasn't just a matter of repeating the process. It's developing a whole new relationship. It's there's people from sourcing, from supplier quality, from the quality team, from legal, from the engineering team that have to validate all of the components. Going through the cycle testing alone can take several months of validating that it's just strong enough to actually perform the way the rest of the plastic does. Then you get some really interesting and creative hiccups, like importing it from one country to another, and it's been marked as waste, and now they don't want to import waste into their country. When we would like to use it as a raw material, we would like it to be classified as a raw material that could maybe sit on the docks for several months, again trying to get material to be concepted and thought of differently. There are just a number of different challenges. The other interesting challenge is that with ocean plastic, there aren't thousands and thousands and thousands of suppliers we can choose from. So if we wanted to buy, let's say, black nylon from a supplier, there are many, many suppliers around the world who could give us black nylon. If this one can't deliver, we could go to another one. But here we're tied to a specific supplier. So if they have an issue, we have to stay with them and go through all, make sure that everything is solved until they can actually deliver the material. And sometimes that, that means you really don't have a backup. You really don't have another source you can go to, because there just aren't enough sources of ocean plastic suppliers at the moment. So you mentioned this might be a dream for an entrepreneur. I want to reiterate that if there's anyone in the audience who's thinking of becoming an entrepreneur, this is what we need, is more folks who are willing to recycle the material, because there's not enough available, and it would be nice if we had more than one option to go to should this one slow down, or if we are working in another area of the world and we want to mold components for a different market, so we would have a material available more locally in different areas. But there really is that much complexity. Until you're in it, you can't really picture all the different challenges and all the different adventures what you'll go on. But there really is, month by month, week by week, and day by day, there's a new challenge coming up.
Yeah, I for sure. It's and it's interesting to me too. I think when we first started this work in 2016, 2017, there were a handful of suppliers. And since then, we've seen more suppliers come into the market to be able to meet the conditions of companies. But a lot of these are really small suppliers, and it's still a nascent industry. So how do you balance the needs of the company? All three of your companies are quite large. So how do you balance the needs of your companies to go through that scrutiny with suppliers to make sure you're working with the right suppliers? And with such a new market too, where there isn't the redundancy in the supply chain that you might need to make sure that you have the assurance that you need, that supply is going to be there over the long haul. So how do you balance that? How do you balance that tension? And I think Courtney at Trek, you guys have lived through over the last several years a lot of kind of shifts of where you've done your manufacturing as well, which I would have to imagine has influenced the way that you've engaged with some suppliers or how you're thinking about supplier management. So talk a little bit about that. And then Jane and Ellen, I'd love to hear your responses too with how do you balance engaging with a relatively small supplier while still meeting your supplier evaluation and management requirements that you have at your two companies. So just hop in and join the conversation there.
We definitely have had a lot of changes, especially in these last couple of years with suppliers. We have tried to build in a little bit of redundancy, but as you guys mentioned, there isn't a whole lot of pool to draw from on that front. A lot of it is trying to build relationships with these suppliers and making sure that if something goes wrong, that we're aware of it. And if there's a way for us to help, then we're stepping up too. Other than that, sometimes it just kind of doesn't go how you want it to. But a lot of it's just trying to make sure that you're building the relationship so that it's a two-way street, making sure that if something happens, you're ready to lend a hand to and not just sit back and wait for them to fix it for you.
And I think that's exactly right. Oftentimes it doesn't go how you want it to. Nobody wanted this earthquake in Haiti. It's a reality. What is that doing to our supply? What is that doing, of course, to the collectors that we rely on? We have product that we've committed and we need that supply. So what we're focused on is scaling. How do we take what we've started and make sure we scale it to a level and then open source it so others can come in from other parts of the world and replicate what we've done there, creating kind of more competition in this market, more availability of this type of material. So, with what we've been able to do, installing the wash line, investing in this type of infrastructure, we've used over 65 million bottles to date in more than 50 HP products. And that is an example of how we've been able to scale. The volume that we were sourcing out of Haiti, started so much smaller, and that continues to grow. But meanwhile, by being part of a group, Dune, like Next Wave, has been incredibly important for us to share our learnings, both good and the mistakes we've made along the way, to help accelerate the development of these supply chains in other countries so that there is more redundancy, there is better resiliency, and we're learning from what we've done to be able to scale faster.
I think one of the interesting things we've done is really work with our supply chain teams to look at how they're working and change the way they're working. So the relationships we build around ocean plastic and recovering ocean plastic get a different sort of set of considerations. Like if we're sourcing a generic material that you can buy from 1,000 different suppliers, then you just look for the most reliable, availability is, there are certain criteria you'll look for, but you might not develop as deep of a relationship. So with our ocean plastic suppliers, there's a lot more that goes into that relationship, a lot more relationship building. And then some of the things like pushing on cost and pushing on pricing might not happen in as strong of a way. We might have a lot more dialogue and back and forth, or the exact requirements of the material, like accepting a color that's slightly maybe varies a bit more than we would normally be willing to accept to allow that product to be approved and to allow that material to continue flowing. There's some more allowances that end up happening. I think to really get things started and get things going. And then the ultimate goal is, of course, to scale up. And then we're trying to do that as fast as we can. So that's really where we start to, as you mentioned, create redundancies. Or I think it was Courtney that mentioned create redundancies in the supply chain. And that's really helps, I think, everyone when there's more of supply available.
Yeah, our supplier map includes suppliers from Denmark, which most people wouldn't think about for ocean-bound plastic. But we can get great HDPE out of Denmark from fishing nets that were once bound for the ocean, and polypropylene as well. And so if that helps to stabilize the supply chain to make sure you can keep doing what you're doing to have impact, great. It's helping marine animals and it's helping communities everywhere to do it. There's a question in the chat that I think is really important. I don't know if I'm saying your name right, Kehi or Kahi. With a name like Dune, you can call me Dwayne or Dawn from this point forward. I think the largest challenge is making sure the consumer doesn't look at their purchase of ocean plastic products as a credit for their own consumption of plastic. Absolutely. I think all panelists here would agree with you on that, that we know we have to all reduce in at first. That's the very first thing we have to do. Courtney, your sustainability report at Trek talks about all the reduction. I had no idea how many components of a bicycle were wrapped in plastic. That was shocking to me. You've done a really great job of just getting rid of non-essential plastics. So what is the total volume you've been able to get rid of?
I don't know the number on that, but it's a very large number.
It must have been surprising too when you just started looking at all the pieces and parts and what comes wrapped in plastic.
Yes.
Kind of crazy.
Not a great surprise.
Right. And then Ellen, you as well. You did a great collaboration with Heron Preston a couple of years ago where you looked at a poly bag that we're using, which actually was an inspiration for us too with the Tom Ford Plastic Innovation Prize, which we can talk more about that in a different session later, a different live session with you. But where you looked at replacing that material, the poly bag material, with a different material. So it's almost like everywhere you go, everywhere you look, and you see plastic, what I love about this conversation is that I never see anybody stop at the straw or stop at one thing. It seems like everybody is constantly looking for where can we reduce first to the company, and then where can we get more of this plastic that nobody else seems to think has any value, right? Or no one else is collecting. And I think that's to the second part of the question is, looking at plastic recycling as the solution when in reality it's not. I mean, this Next Wave Plastics, you all have had the goal of, we don't want to be doing this in 10 years. We're doing it now because there's a lot of plastic and we can use this material, and you're showing value for it where value doesn't exist today. But maybe talk a little bit about how your companies are looking at plastic reduction. And I think too, Ellen in particular, I'd love to hear you talk about, it's kind of like lit on fire inside HP. I joke all the time, I cannot keep up with the number of products you're producing that have ocean-bound plastic in it. And yeah. I can't. You probably can't either. But talk about like how you have to, because you're the impact officer, so that's your job. You have to do that. But you've got a lot coming out. So talk with us about the conversation internally and what's been happening at HP to really kind of set it on fire.
Sure. So first, I guess I'll talk about the elimination of plastic at HP. So we've got a couple of goals out there. One, which is to eliminate 75% of single-use plastic from our packaging in our products by 2025. And I saw a comment in the chat earlier about packaging. You're absolutely right. We need to move away from plastic material in packaging to other renewable sources, like molded pulp fiber, for example, is one of the materials that we've been using. So we've got elimination goals, which I think are hugely important, and that's at the very beginning of our plastic strategy. Eliminate it where possible. But then at some point, if you absolutely have to use plastic as the material, you have choices, right? What kind of plastic are you using? Are you using virgin? We need to move away from that. We also have a goal for 75% product and packaging circularity by 2030. And what does product circularity mean? That means that the materials our products are made out of, as well as our packaging, are either renewable, reused, or recycled. So if you have to use plastic, let's look at those options of reusing those plastic parts that already exist. And if we can't do that, using recycled plastic. So I think that's really important to really think about that hierarchy of eliminate it first. And then if you have to use it, which kind are you sourcing from that is the most sustainable, as well with the biggest social impact? And that's what led us to the project in Haiti. In terms of your comment about the momentum inside the company, when we launched our first product using ocean-bound plastic, the HP ink cartridge, employees and our leadership team took notice. They were wowed by the fact that we made this happen. Right? We built something that had never existed before in a way that was really disruptive to our supply chain. And Jane, you made that point about how to make things differently. And that's exactly what we have to do with all of our products inside HP. We can't keep making them out of virgin materials. That just can't happen for us to sustain life on this planet. We all know that. So, what we're doing is part of that bigger systemic change to drive towards a circular economy. And, the competitive nature of HP is alive and well, because when the people on our personal systems side of our business, our PC side, started to see what print was doing with those ink cartridges, cartridges, they got in the game. And we have the first mobile workstation with ocean-bound plastic, the first laptop with ocean-bound plastic, first display monitor. And like I mentioned now, there's over 50 HP products that use this material and counting. So a lot of energy and excitement by all of our employees as well as our leadership team to really have the best possible sustainable impact for the long term.
And Courtney, your company is, it must be driven by a ton of people who are insanely competitive. Bicycle company.
Absolutely.
So how has this ocean-bound plastic work you've been doing, or really looking at sustainability at large now at Trek, what is the conversation like at Trek? Talk with us a little bit about how people think about their jobs now, and what kind of enthusiasm or excitement there is for basically like looking under every rock and seeing what more there is you can do. And even it probably even extends to your events and looking at your sponsors. Just talk a little bit more about that for us.
Yeah, so that was one of the biggest barriers coming in, not having a sustainability department established, is trying to figure out how to integrate that into the culture on a fundamental level like that for us to capitalize on some of that competitiveness. And the biggest thing was figuring out how to communicate what's happening around the company, because lots of people had lots of tiny sustainability projects going on that they had just pushed forward themselves. So figuring out how to make other people aware of what else was going on around the company and kind of give that wink, wink, nudge, nudge, like, too bad you're not doing so great, to other people so that they could start gearing up to pushing their own sustainability improvements was probably the biggest step.
Yeah, no pun intended, gearing up. I was invited to speak at an event at Trek. I can't remember what you call it, but it's your annual event where normal people from all over the company get up, and it's kind of like a talent show. I feel like it's like the Trek talent show, and it's really awesome that the guy who serves your coffee in the lunchroom is an amazing opera singer. So he gets up and he sings his operatic tune, and so it's it feels too like it's a company that really recognizes the individual contribution. There is a collective goal, but there's also that individual element to it. Did I get that right from my experience and kind of seeing and getting to meet some of those folks?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, amazing. So Jane, I'm going to throw this question to you. You have been in the sustainability space for a really long time. Ellen, you as well, and Courtney too. And the IPCC report just came out 2 weeks ago. And I'm sure to all of us here and probably everybody at Sea Change, not a shocker. Unfortunately, I remember when the 2007 IPCC report came out, I had just been trained by Al Gore to deliver his infamous presentation, his slideshow. And we were all kind of waiting with, bated breath to see what was the 2007 IPCC report going to demonstrate, what were the pathways forward, what was business as usual, what were all the different scenarios that we could continue to move towards. It's like dating me, would the United States and Australia ratify the Kyoto Protocol? Well, we're way past the Kyoto Protocol. We're now into the Paris Accord. Were you all surprised with the IPCC findings? And I would say, talk about your work in plastics in particular. How do you connect this? Because I think this is a lot of question for people, right? Why are we working on plastics and why are we not working on climate change? But how do you personally connect this work to climate impacts?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a good thing to recognize that these are not separate impacts. We talk about them in like separate categories so that it's possible to measure them. It's possible to see progress. It's possible to kind of talk about where we're at. But at the end of the day, it's the world we live in, and it's all connected. They're not separate things. We just have to talk about them that way to be able to kind of look at them. So we look at something like ocean plastic. Of course, as you mentioned, the fishing nets, the ghost fish for decades, possibly hundreds of years, that affects the marine life. The marine life, of course, affects the ocean. The ocean has a great impact on the atmosphere in our world. It's all I mean, we can't really work on one problem without being aware of the others and influencing it in some way. It's although we need to maybe take our starting points, and when we're looking at this problem today and addressing, climate change during our conversations in a different conversation, that would be the context. But ultimately, we know that climate change is really going to affect the oceans and the life in the oceans. We also know that the reciprocal is also true, that the oceans affect the climate in a serious way. So it's really very interconnected, and it's just because we're talking about ocean plastic today doesn't mean that we're leaving that behind. It's just not the way we're looking, the framework we're using at the moment to look at the conversation. But we know that ultimately we have to make progress on all these fronts, and that they all affect each other.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that there wasn't anything particularly for me that was surprising, but what I think the clear importance of that report is to drive a sense of urgency like never before. And I think that's helped within our own company to really just generate increased momentum. I was in a meeting this morning with our personal systems leadership team, and every question came from all the managing directors. What more can we do? How do we move faster? And so I think really the question is, what is that pathway to reach net zero carbon, to reach ultimate circularity in our products? So the willingness is there, the sense of urgency is there, and now we need all of the innovation, the power, not just within our own company, because there's no way we can do it alone. Even look at what we've done on ocean-bound plastic. We couldn't do that alone. We needed our clear partners, work and First Mile. We needed Next Wave. We still need all of these organizations to share, to innovate collectively together, because that's the only way we're going to get out of the situation we have.
Courtney, what about you at Trek? I mean, you are a company made of people who live outside on two wheels, or three, I guess, two wheels at least. So you're a company of people who are connected to nature. And I think that's one of the things I took away. We did a podcast with two of the Trek bicycle teammates. And that was one of the cool things that I took away from that is like, we're outside all the time. We are connected to nature all the time because we are on our bikes, or we are making bikes for people who have the opportunity to be on their bikes. So how does a report like the IPCC report that just came out and its projections for what's going to happen really over the next 3 to 5 to 10 years, how does that change the conversation internally at Trek? How do you look at it differently?
It's definitely kind of a rain cloud on how excited everyone's been about all the sustainability improvements that we're making, just because knowing that we're in the minority making those changes is kind of a bummer. But it's definitely also, like you guys have said, kind of spurred on some more immediacy and urgency, trying to get things done faster, starting to really buckle down. Like, if no one else is going to do this, then we should really do this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I have, I have on my desk, actually, it's not a plug for anybody. If you haven't gotten the book, you must get this book. It's All We Can Save. It's backwards. All We Can Save. It's an anthology of articles, poems, sayings by women who are talking about the climate crisis. And personally, I've been in this space since 2001, I guess, in some capacity, having worked with electric utilities on demand reduction programs prior to working in the climate arena directly. And the IPCC report, I'll be the first one to admit, it really impacted me. Unlike anything else I've read before, it really drove it home. And I think the urgency with the situation for me, as a mom of two, as the head of an organization that is, working intently on this every single day, it does make it kind of hard sometimes to wake up, right? And to get out there and fight and keep going. So I open this book every day, and every day I find some inspirational quote. I'm like, oh yeah, that's it. We're going to do this today. So I think it's important that we all recognize that as well, that there will be up days and there will be down days. And as long as we and our companies are continuing to move forward and driving this change as best that we possibly can, and demonstrating it's possible and giving people hope and inspiration, I feel like that's worth getting up every single day for and driving this. And Jane, you mentioned too about the species. We talk a lot about plastic waste. Here we're talking about products that integrate this plastic waste. We started the conversation talking about people and recognizing there are people impacted by this every day, and that we need to care for, and we need to help stand up, and we need to, make sure their livelihoods are well cared for. And then there's also the marine species, and that is probably, one of the key things that drive us at Lonely Whale is knowing that we're keeping plastic out of the ocean and out of the river and out of lakes where marine species tend to ingest it, allows then for greater diversity and abundance of species in an environment, in an oceanic environment that is constantly changing. So it's becoming harder for these marine species to remain resilient. And so for me, I keep feeling like the more we can keep out of the ocean in any way, shape, or form, whatever is possible, then the better for all of us over the long term.
That's absolutely right. We're all interconnected, right? What happens in the ocean affects humans. What happens on land affects what's going on in the ocean. So I think just the increased awareness of how your actions as an individual can ripple and what that really means, let alone thinking about the vastness of your actions as a company and really taking responsibility for the small decisions you're making as well as the really big decisions, because they all have an impact and it's all interconnected.
Yeah, great. Well, I would love to get advice from all of you. How do you get started in this? Like, where do you begin? For folks who are listening in on this, they're probably wondering, okay, it sounds amazing what your 3 companies are doing, and you've got teams and you're well on your way, and although you've got some ups and downs and hurdles, you're already there, you're doing it. So what advice would you give to the listeners of where to go, where to get started, and how to just start being part of this conversation?
Well, I would think about kind of two vectors. One is what's most material to you? Where can you have the biggest change? And really think critically about that. If it's a certain material impact, like, focusing on plastics, or it may be something else, but really think critically about what is most material to you and where you can make the biggest change. And then the other thing is, where is there existing traction? So for example, again, in HP, if we think about, what was going on with our recycling process, we were already using recycled bottles. That was already happening. And we were using over 1 million a day. And so that was an easy area to kind of think about a swap, and experimenting with that swap of moving from the North American plastics market to ocean-bound plastic solutions. So wherever there's already some energy that you can capitalize on and increase the momentum, that's one vector, and then match that, of course, with where you can create the biggest impact.
I think I would say it depends if you're in the audience as an individual thinking, what choices do I make in my life, compared to if you're thinking I know I'm going to manufacture a product. Those are kind of different considerations. So as an individual, I think that the feedback to companies that sustainability is important to you, that you're making decisions based on that, is really valuable. Demanding that companies are more sustainable is quite valuable, because companies do hear that and react. Sometimes, unfortunately, as we get more and more demand for sustainability, some companies react by just talking about it more. So really not just asking for companies to put out a story or a message or a tagline, but to have more to their story than that, than just, this is a green product. Like, that could be a certification. It could be a more thorough validation. Just something underlying what claims a company is making. So I think it's worth highlighting. As individuals, you do have a significant power. Then if you're thinking of manufacturing, I would agree with Ellen to look at sort of where are you impacting the world? Where do you have the most opportunity to make change? And I would really recommend starting with like your lowest hanging fruit, and really, not starting to be perfect day 1 or day 2, really to make a plan to aim for what you can do and build off of the momentum of successes. Because there's a lot of people that need to do things either differently, need to learn to do things differently, need to change their attitudes or think about things differently, that you have to bring along the way with you when you make change. And if you start off by having them fail, then it's always a lot more challenging and frustrating. So starting off with something where it was quite achievable and building on that momentum of success, and then taking on the next thing that's a little more challenging, bringing everyone along with you, it has a lot more ability to go a lot farther and really eventually take on a lot more.
I think Ellen and Jane got the meat of it, but I think the only thing I would add is to make sure that you're asking lots of questions, partly just to make sure that you know what's going on yourself, understand what you're talking about, what you're looking at, what you're trying to prioritize, but also figuring out kind of which barriers are a little less sturdy than others, seeing where you can push, where you maybe should go around, figuring out what all you can do based on not necessarily what people are telling you can do, but where you can kind of start poking the bear.
Yeah, and I love the comment that Kevin, you just put in the chat. Let's get messy. There's too much we need to do, too fast for any other approach. And absolutely, that's right. Like, it's time for disruption. It's time to really think differently than we ever have. Love that comment.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I mean, what I love about what all three of your companies did, and I think all the Next Wave member companies have done this, is where they started was with a core product that defined who they were. You started with the print cartridge. Think the cartridge for print, Ellen. You started with the Bontrager water bottle cage for Trek bicycles. Jane, you started with your chair and a component in the chair. You didn't try to tackle the entire chair. You tackled the component in the chair to get it right, and you can expand from there. So I think too, going back to what is the core of your company? What is at the heart and soul of it? And can you create change there? And if you can, then great. It will probably catch on like wildfire, as it has with these three companies. So here's another question here. For your industries, is there industry-wide support and collaboration for companies looking to improve their supply chains, or companies mostly on their own to tackle these challenges? I mean, here are these three companies, Aaron, plus the other 7, 8, 9. We'll announce at least 2 more this fall that are joining Next Wave. They're at the table talking to each other. You've got Herman, is it Miller Knoll? You've got Miller Knoll, used to be Herman Miller, and Humanscale, direct competitors in the marketplace, at the table together. You've got HP and Dell, direct competitors at the marketplace, talking to each other and learning from each other. So at Next Wave Plastics, there is definitely a sense of collaboration, cross-industry, and now within industry collaboration as well to tackle these issues. We now have 2 watch manufacturers. One will announce this fall, who are at the table talking to each other as well. And there's just something about that, isn't there? I feel like that Next Wave and consortiums like this bring people together, and certainly your companies are part of these kind of collaborations outside of ocean-bound plastic in other walks of your life. But there's just something about coming together to solve for ocean health issues that allows some of that competitive edge to go away, although everyone is hyper competitive still. But it allows that competitive edge to kind of go away, and there's more collaboration. What do you three feel like is the most important thing that, at least in the ocean-bound plastic space, has been present to allow that collaboration to truly come forward?
I think it's a shared sense of purpose, right? Like, the problem is so big, it's so clear. If you go to any beach anywhere in the world, whether, here again, it's near San Francisco on the Pacific Ocean or any location, you will find plastic there. We know this, right? It's a firsthand experience as humans that we're all having all over the world. So I think the vastness of the problem that collectively together we as humans have to solve, I think that's the drive for us to all kind of open our doors to each other. Dune, you mentioned HP and Dell are sitting next to each other at the table at Next Wave Plastics, working on this together. Some of the fiercest competitors, putting that aside to tackle this issue. And I think that's what this calls for. It's doing things differently, having no fear, being ready to challenge yourselves, your competitors, and your industry to do more.
Yeah, I think sustainability-oriented people are more inclined to share those kinds of things anyways, but I think people are also recognizing, like, this is not the kind of thing that we should be hoarding. Like, this is something that we should be sharing so everyone can capitalize on it for the sake of the environment, and B, something that we should be trying to come together so we can expedite what we're working on and try to use collective leverage to start making some changes.
I think, yeah, we had the same sense of, like, when we launched our product, we had no illusions that we had now individually solved. Our company has now solved the ocean plastic problem. It's, clearly it's, for lack of a better word, a drop in the ocean. It's really just, there's so much there that is beyond any individual organization, any individual company. Even if we used nothing but ocean plastic for all of our products, it still wouldn't solve the problem. We know that it's beyond us, it's beyond even our industry. We really have to start expanding and trying to recruit as many other companies to join us in this mission as well. So that to me, it was exciting to also collaborate with others who are on this journey and recognize the importance of it, and to try to recruit others to join us as well.
Now, Emily, I'm so sorry to say, I don't know of a lot in the healthcare industry. I know that there are initiatives at individual healthcare facilities, healthcare campuses, to do things like try to replace the little plastic Dixie cups for paper, going back to paper, things like that. We are actually starting to see, strangely enough, some collaboration in the dental industry, where instead of using more of disposable plastics, using more durable plastics or alternative materials. So that is fascinating. So I would say, Emily, like, go for it. Start asking some questions. Start asking around, like, how can we more properly dispose of the disposable items that we know that we need to have, or at least we think we need to have. And then where are there opportunities to start to swap things out? I think curiosity, what's that old horrible saying, like curiosity killed the cat? I think curiosity is going to solve this problem. There's a bunch of curious people of like, why do we have so much disposable gloves? And why do we have so many disposable masks? And, you know, is there a different way to do it? So start asking questions and get curious, and, you know, leverage these three incredible women and others who are driving change within their companies to make it happen. What do you all think about Tom Bishop's theory? I would have a theory that if more waste floated, we'd be solving things even faster, as the scope of the problem would be more visible. Love your thoughts on that.
Well, it certainly would be easier. That's for sure. But, you know, obviously that's not the case. But I think, you know, one of the tricks is to solve it all before it gets into the ocean. And that's where we're focused.
I think that's the other thing too, is that most plastic in the ocean is actually not very visible. There's a lot of plastic that does sink, like the fishing nets all mostly sink to the bottom of the ocean. So that's where we're getting them from. They are wreak havoc on coral reefs when they do that. The other thing is that plastic breaks down into really small microplastic pieces. So you can see that it looks like a clean ocean, and then you'll test the water and find tons of pieces of little tiny particles of plastic in it. So there's actually much more plastic than you can see floating in the ocean. I think some of the real urgency and call to action comes from the effects on the ecosystem. So when we see animals and birds that are, you know, dying with stomachs full of plastic and then basically starved to death, we realize that this is the impact that it's having. Visibility definitely can be useful, but I think it's really the effect on the ecosystem that calls us more urgently to action.
If only we could see our own greenhouse gas emissions floating past us that said, these are Dune's emissions, right? And it's, you know, I could see it and I'd be like, oh, that's super embarrassing. I need to decrease the amount of Dune emissions I have. Or if, you know, somebody did an audit of what's in my trash can versus what's in my recycling every week when it gets picked up, that would be amazing as well. Because if it is more visible, you know, Tom, you're totally right. Like, if it's more visible, we'll do something more about it. Yeah, great. Well, in the last couple of minutes that we have here, I would love to know from you, what keeps you all inspired? Share with this audience where you have hope and where it comes from. It'd be a great way to end the day.
I think I get inspired just looking at things that other people have managed to accomplish and seeing, if you go out looking for it, there's a lot of stuff that's very encouraging, and just seeing that kind of momentum that things are happening and they aren't tiny things. Like, there's a lot of very exciting things happening if you go looking for them, and it's not just constant rain clouds and wet blankets.
And I think I'd say a kind of twofold answer to that. One is that a lot of the things that I initially hear that sound terrible, I guess I think to myself that a few years ago was still true, but I wasn't hearing about it. Ocean plastic was still going into the ocean 10 years ago, and we weren't having this kind of panel discussions about it. You know, some of the things that we sort of took for granted as normal, the fact that we're uncomfortable with them now, in fact, is maybe a sign of progress. And I guess the other half of it is I do have two small kids as well, and I kind of can't help but think, what kind of world can I leave them with? And that keeps me going on a daily basis.
Yeah, and I agree with both of those. I think it really is about, what is possible. And there have been certain instances within my own life or within the work I'm doing at HP where you kind of feel like, I don't know where to go from here. I don't know how to solve this. And then somehow, the stars align and you take a step forward. It might not be as big or as fast as you had hoped for, but it's a step forward. And so really, celebrating those successes, those innovations, that progress, and bringing other people with you, like you mentioned, doing inside HP, our whole company, I feel like is with me. They're all on the sustainable impact team at HP. It's not just me and my team leading this, it's the whole company. So I think we're at a really special moment in time where everybody is understanding the true urgency of these issues and they're ready to take action. So I think it's up to all of us to figure out the vision of what are the right steps, how do we do it together, because that's the only way we're going to make the progress we need.
Well, let me end this with a quote for everybody from All We Can Save. Again, I love this book. I'm absolutely devouring it. And it's a quote from one of the authors that I'll leave you with. And that quote is, "There is joy in acting upon our love for the earth." Judith Schwartz. I love that quote. I think it's a great way to end. Thank you, everybody, for attending this session. Courtney, Ellen, and Jane, thank you for everything you do at your companies, for everything you do with us. It's been a pleasure working with you, and I cannot wait to see what else we accomplish together. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your conference.